Street. It is not always easy to face your past. Our past, for most of us, has uncomfortable and unpalatable moments. For years, I simultaneously felt homesick and dreaded the thought of returning to Melbourne, as though it was only the geographical distance that separated me from my past and not the years or decades that had passed. I have lived in New York for over 30 years, yet I still feel as though New York contains my present. My past is in Melbourne. The truth is that it is hard to avoid your past. For most of us, it is always present. When I was 14, we moved from a small cottage in the inner suburban, then very working-class suburb of North Carlton to Elwood, a more middle-class suburb on the other side of the city. The new house seemed enormous to me. It had 3 bedrooms, a living and dining room, a large kitchen, and an indoor toilet. At night, I no longer had to unlock the back door and go outside to the toilet, which had been next to a pile of coal that seemed to be a playground for the local rats. We lived in Dickens Street. Dickens Street was surrounded by, among others, Wordsworth, Tennyson, Milton, Scott, Shelley, Keats, Browning, Bronte, Burns, and Shakespeare streets. The streets were named by the local council in the 1850s in order to uplift the character of the residents of Elwood, who were deemed to be a bunch of cantankerous malcontents. It must have worked, as all our neighbours seemed very nice, and I don't think I saw even one cantankerous malcontent. A few years ago, for the first time in almost 20 years, I went back to that house. I was so nervous about going inside, as though my past was lodged in the house and not in my heart. In front of the front door was a wrought-iron gate with a wrought-iron peacock in the centre of the gate. The doorbell still had the same chimes. I felt both very moved and very anxious at the sound of those chimes. I hadn't yet entered the house. The kitchen was what I dreaded most. The kitchen had been my mother's domain. It was where she peeled and chopped vegetables and fruit. It was where she ground veal and beef and added onions, eggs, and breadcrumbs to make meatballs and meatloaves. And where she baked sponge cakes so light that my father and I were banished from the kitchen in case our footsteps deflated the cake. Stepping into the house, I felt overwhelmed by something I had never noticed. The house was just beautiful. I must have been blinded by my teenage years or my repressed anxiety and anger. I was stunned at the carefully crafted and designed details everywhere I looked. The deep blue carpet in the hallway and living and dining room was so plush that almost 6 decades later it still looked new. Indented in the carpet were a series of rectangular shapes that were beside and inside each other. The glass walls of the shower were sandblasted, and the floor was tiled with small pink, grey, and black tiles, each individually placed in a pattern that looked as though the tiles had been woven together. Every light fitting was beautiful. Even the handles of the drawers and cupboards seemed to be in tune with the rest of the house, which had been carefully maintained by the new owner. Finally, I walked into the kitchen. I could hardly breathe. I looked around and was shocked at the realization that the stove had 6 burners. At the time I had lived there, no one in Melbourne, except for restaurants or the very wealthy, had a 6-burner stove. I half expected my mother to appear and wished that she could. I wanted to cry for having blocked out the extraordinary feat that my father had achieved in building the house. My father was not a man who was interested in anything to do with architecture or design. I knew he had hired an architect, and I knew that he had, after work, regularly driven straight to the construction site that was going to be our new home. He climbed up ladders and examined the shells of the walls and the ceilings and the beams. My father knew nothing about construction, but he wanted to know everything about the construction of this house. What I knew at the time, and what was blazingly clear now, was that the house was built out of my father's deep and undying love for my mother. I moved out of that house when I was 19. At 21...